Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Hilary Duff, titled Breathe In, Breathe Out. Okay, real confession time. I used to be a huge fan of Hilary Duff. No, really, back about a decade ago when I was still a teenager and listening to a lot of Eminem and symphonic metal, I still listen to Hilary Duff too. I watched the Lizzie McGuire show, which on some level has not aged well at all. I watched the movie based off the show, which really isn't all that good. And perhaps most embarrassingly for a music critic, I listened to a lot of her music and I was a fan too. To the point where I actually saw her live in concert, not joking there. Because going back to those albums to the early to mid 2000s, most of the material is okay at best. Let's be honest with y'all here. Hilary Duff was riding a wave for young starlets who could pull off a veneer of acoustic pop authenticity, could rack up a fair number of hits on the charts. And considering that Hilary is being backed by Disney and was signed to Hollywood Records, it was clear that her handlers were aiming to capitalize on whatever residual buzz she had from Lizzie McGuire to turn over some overproduced schlock that was quickly rushed out that frankly Brie Larson was doing better anyways. The funny thing is that going back to that album, which she does have some real duds, that self-titled record is mediocre at best, her 2007 album Dignity saw her move in more of an electronic dance pop direction, and it actually worked pretty well for her, as she had writing credits pretty much across the board. For me, I always get the impression that Hilary Duff was a better writer than she was an actual singer. She didn't have a lot of presence as a vocalist, and unlike Britney Spears, she wasn't about to pile on the effects in order to compensate for it, which I guess I can kind of respect in terms of authenticity, but it didn't always make her the most interesting performer. And yet, even as dance pop was set to blow up with the club boom in the late 2000s, Hilary Duff left pop music entirely for a good 8 years. She got married and divorced, she had a baby, she wrote a couple books, and even did a little bit of acting for TV and independent films, mostly in an effort to ditch the more wholesome Lizzie McGuire image. The interesting thing is that while her career has not been stellar by any stretch of the mind, she also hasn't had the stage of running wild and flaming out that other hit TV stars like Amanda Bynes or Lindsay Lohan had, which gave me the impression that the down-to-earth elements of Hilary's writing actually had some authenticity behind them. But then again, at the same time, until the requests started pouring in more than I expected, I had no interest into looking into her most recent album. For one, she only had writing credits on maybe about a third of that record, and for another, it just looked like a cash-in to me to rope back some of the old fans who wanted to recapture some of that old glory days from almost a decade ago. Hell, that's pretty much why I'm here. So I took a look at Breathe In, Breathe Out. Is it any good? Well, I don't know, I guess it's alright enough. On one hand, you can tell that Hilary Duff has a firm grasp on her strengths as a performer and as a songwriter, and at least some good, enjoyable pop songs. But the problem is that it doesn't really lead to great songs, and the more I just listened through this album time after time, the less it really jumped out at me and really stuck with me. It's not the sort of record that does a lot wrong, to be fair, but I'd be hard-pressed to find a lot that's all that unique or special or exciting too, which means I really don't have a lot to say about it beyond it just being kinda decent. If you're a fan, go check it out. Otherwise, you won't really care. But I think the best place to start would be Hilary Duff herself. I said that earlier that she doesn't have the greatest emotive presence or range, and that's definitely true here. She doesn't quite bring an emotionally intense or visceral mood, as her voice falls into very smooth, gentle cooing that has an easy flow, and doesn't exactly require a multitude of effects to stand out, but doesn't exactly stand out from much of the pack either. I've referenced Britney Spears before, but I think a better comparison might be a more relaxed and easygoing Selena Gomez, at least before Selena Gomez's material went off a cliff, especially with the latter's choice to embrace more EDM influences, which are all over this album in spades. Now, to be fair to Hilary, while the beats are thicker and heavier like most percussion-driven EDM-inspired pop, she doesn't really compromise on her melodies. You can still hear them, or choose to overmix or overload her songs, and it really becomes a question of what form those melodies take for why I might like them or not. So while I didn't really love the whistles and chipmunk fragments that peppered the lead-off single Sparks, or when they came back on that weedy synth on Picture This, probably my least favorite song on the album, the slightly hollow and muffled keys of My Kind, pretty solid and balanced the groove pretty well. Hell, the ultra crisp beat and spacey synths on Confetti, along with an interpolation of Heaven is a Place on Earth by Belinda Carlisle that I actually really liked, or the sandy feel of Arms Around a Memory, they work pretty well. Of course, since it's Hilary Duff, she's always like bringing in some guitars on her tracks, and adds a gentleness to the otherwise booming title track, accenting the surprising horns on Lies, driving the main acoustic grooves on Braveheart, obviously showing up on the Ed Sheeran co-written Tattoos, and probably at the very best on the stripped back Night Like This, a duet with big-time Rush singer Kendall Schmidt. But I do wish there was more warmth to the guitar lines that don't sound as painfully processed and compressed, or even that the percussion beat, the hand claps of the beats, didn't always take precedence over everything else in the songs. But I think the larger issue is that so much of this album is very much mid-tempo. Despite a few distinguishing factors from track to track, maybe the horns or the guitars here and there, this album reaches a mood and pretty much stays there. And yeah, sure, it's a comfortable mood, it's a good mood, but it also becomes very easy for me to just tune out and for a lot of the songs just blur together. They're good songs, but they don't really have a lot to set them apart, and it's not exactly helped by the lyrics. Now let me stress that they aren't bad by any stretch of the mind. In terms of pop lyricism, outside of a few annoying rhyming slip-ups, they're generally pretty agreeable, and they're well written enough to coast by fairly easily. And even the songs that Hilary didn't write are generally mature and respectable enough in addressing the relationships or breakups that I can generally accept them. The problem is that they don't really have a lot of unique personality beyond their maturity, and a surprising number of 80s references, from Belinda Carlisle, as I said before, to the straight lift of my kind from In Excess, which kind of makes sense given how much I'm reminded of late 80s pop starlets like Belinda Carlisle or Debbie Gibson, plus a bit of early Kylie Minogue. But it doesn't exactly help individual songs stand out beyond falling into head over heels love songs or warning people away from that, or breakup / moving on songs. And in the latter case, I'm not exactly sure Hilary or her instrumentation can really sell that. I mean, I like the title track, or Lies, or Arms Are Out of Memory, or Braveheart, or Tattoo, or even the overmixed One in a Million, which actually has some real ego behind it that I actually kind of liked. But Hilary is way too smooth and reserved or lacking in range to really give these songs the anger or real sense of heartbreak they need to ground them in some sort of drama. And the frustrating thing is that if she had that sense of drama, I'd probably be all over these songs, because there's a maturity to them that I can really appreciate in a pop context, even if they do kind of run together a little bit. The song I liked the most was Night Like This, for two reasons. Hilary and Kendall Schmidt have pretty damn good interplay, they trade off bars pretty well, and there's more of a story on the song about two lonely people splitting a cab and falling for each other. Actually pretty sweet, but there's more of a story behind it. There was doing more outside the traditional pop context. But look, if I didn't used to be a fan of Hilary Duff, I wouldn't have cared about this record in the slightest, even despite it actually having some quality. And that's mostly because this album takes no real chances. It's decent, sure, and very listenable, but it fades into the background very quickly for me, and that doesn't exactly surprise me either. You can tell from the writing and the songs that she chose that Hilary's not going to go wild or take some huge artistic risk. But on some level, I wish this album was a little bit less safe and inoffensive. She can probably get away with it at this point. I get the impression that Hilary's got a lot of talent, especially as a songwriter. I just wish that she pushed herself a little bit harder in that direction. For me, 6 out of 10, but recommended if you're a fan of Hilary Duff or you're curious, but don't exactly be surprised if this album doesn't really stick with you. As for me, well, I might as well take all the messages that she wrote and just move on. I'm okay with that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming up that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Just to remind you all that my 2-year anniversary is coming up, and as I said, on July 10th, my apologies, I will be covering a hit album from 2014 based on your requests. The album that gets the most requests is the one I cover. If you try to spam my comments across multiple videos, I will know I'm keeping track. Just keep in mind, it might have been an album I've already covered or just a fresh one. Off the stack, I'm open. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.